All right, Carlos, first question.
Yes.
What is OData?
So OData, if you're not, I'm new to OData myself. But what it looks like it is it's an extension and a very structured way to send REST API requests. And it also provides a lot of infrastructure and metadata to any of the tools so that it can perform navigation and understand the underlying relationship between the tables, right? Because the information about indexes and foreign keys are provided to OData server. And in turn, if we look at some of the basic tutorials here, so I pulled up our the website odata.org. It's, if you're new to OData like I am, it's a great place to go. Some of the things here, so you'll start to notice that a lot of the types of requests are very similar to REST. So here we're they're requesting information about a particular user. If you've worked a lot with data virtuality, this was very similar to the REST API, where in the payload you would send a query, but here the query itself is part of the URL. You can send payloads, but it's a very structured way to get information out of a system. So it's not oriented so much toward humans, but more toward the tools. So does that kind of clear things up and what it brings to the table as far as like extending REST?
I think for me it's clear. If you have any questions, guys, just go ahead and put it in your in the Q&A. If there are no questions appearing, we will just continue with our journey to OData. And so, Carlos, my next question would be: when was OData added to data virtuality?
It was added in the 3.0 beta, and you can look for more information about it if you're interested going to our documentation page, going to our 3.0 version, and then searching for OData. It's currently in a preview state, and it was added in 3.0, and it is going to be available for general use a little bit later in 3.1. So if you want to look into it, you can begin looking at some of the syntax, begin playing around with it. At this point, it's still in a preview feature, so please be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. And is there any additional cost associated with using OData?
Yes and no. I always dislike it when people do that, but it's included in data virtuality platform. So let's go take a look at what data virtuality platform is. So right now I'm on pipes. And if we go, this one that you're looking at right here is just plain pipes. If I go here, the code editor is disabled. This is plain pipes. And the next one that we have in our offering is Pipes Pro. So this one you can see here, it includes the code editor. We have sources, jobs, and the other big differentiator between Pipes and Pipes Pro is that you can have multiple data warehouses, right? So if we go here to our Pipes instance, and I go to data warehouse, I can see that you're only allowed one data warehouse or one destination, right? And where OData is going to be enabled is in the Pipes platform. So you can see here the menu bar has changed a lot. You're allowed multiple data warehouses, sources, jobs. It also facilitates materializations as the code editor and the data shop. So this is the full platform, and this is where OData is going to be included as part of the offering. And this is also, if you're wondering when I say platform, this is if you're familiar with data virtuality, you've been using data virtuality for a while. This applies to Matthias, definitely. He's definitely been using this for a while. This used to be the older interface that's known as DB Studio, right? So we're going to be using this a little bit today, and we're also just going to be playing around. And the reason we're not using the the newer web interface is because I'm using a nightly build on my computer so that we can preview some of these new features. So if you heard me correctly, everyone, I'm using a nightly build. So if my computer catches fire, we know what happened. We know what caused it.
Carlos has disconnected.
Yeah.
So, so the next question on my side. So, is there? I mean, we're talking about OData and getting data from data virtuality via OData, but what about the other way around? What about using OData as a data source, like getting data from OData or an OData client? What about this?
So that's currently in development. Where our developers and QA are currently working on this, and it is currently in an alpha state. I don't have an ETA for the release, but it is being worked on and it is an active project. And we'll probably have news, and you'll see one of the announcements in our newsletter if you subscribe. So if you don't subscribe, and you really interested in seeing the OData connector, yeah, please sign up for our newsletter, and that'll help keep you informed.
And additionally, probably to that, regarding connecting to OData REST APIs, we already have some connectors where we connect to OData. So I think Microsoft Dynamics would be, for example, one. And there we basically implemented the OData functionalities right in the connectors. But Carlos will take a deeper look on how it works with metadata and things like that. But we already have some connectors that can connect to OData. And the generic one is the one we're talking about that will still be released. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Carlos, let's talk about the use cases. So which use cases do you see for OData and data virtuality together?
So this is where it gets really interesting. The tools. So we're going to be using DB Studio to configure a lot of these things, but really the big use case is connecting your tools to data virtuality, to the server itself. So a lot of tools right now, I'm just going to pull up Excel as a quick and easy way to look at things. And also I think Power BI and Tableau get too much attention. Poor old Excel just doesn't get anything here. So one of the advantages is that we can grab information from OData, an OData feed, excuse me. And the thing there is that we don't need to deploy any drivers, any additional drivers. So it's really nice. And say, for instance, we are using a particular tool that includes an interface for OData, but doesn't have, or it doesn't allow us to leverage JDBC or ODBC, then OData is a great option for this. We go through and we simply give it a URL to our server. And this will pop up in just a second. So one of the things here is, say, for instance, we're looking at our data. So we're going to look at first our syntax here. We're going to look at the preview feature. And you notice it leverages REST quite a bit, right? So let's go for the quick example here. And we're going to pull this into Excel. And here, my machine isn't actually localhost. I'm running a VM, and it's called CWK9 because I'm running Linux for CentOS version 9. And what we're doing here is we're calling the REST API. We're going to the OData endpoint. We're using data virtuality. There's support in here for multiple schemas, but right now this is always going to be data virtuality. And then we're using the actual schema. So this part comes from here. If you're familiar with our system schemas, this is a sysadmin. And then in here we have, whoops, my mouse clicking ability is horrible today. And we're going to look at roles. So we can see here, I'm going to filter this to roles. And
just
this is the
remark,
table.
yes, just remark from my side, it's 7:20 a.m. for Carlos, so bear with him while he's not clicking on the right buttons.
Yes, just couldn't get enough coffee yet. And here we have a quick preview. And again, this is just sample data from a new instance. So these are all the default roles that are available. So we can see here that, so it's a bit more streamlined, right? Typically what I would have to do to access this data, right, is go to ODBC, configure my ODBC driver, point it to the right server, test it out. And with this, I get a little bit of flexibility, right? I don't have to deploy the drivers. Things are a little bit smoother. And also if the tool just didn't allow me at all, I can just connect, right? And the tool, and the nice thing is the OData server itself will describe the metadata and provide the links. So here's a quick example. So if we look over here, let me drag this window over here. We can see what this looks like with some sample data. So this is the same table that I'm querying. And you can see here the results are in JSON. And when we look at it here in using the OData interface, you can see that there's a lot of metadata that's included in the type of the structure of the result sets, the actual values themselves. And it also supports changing values, right? I mean, in this case, we're dealing with a database, but if you notice in each and every row, right here, it's actually including all the data types. So it's a very self-describing format, and it's very good. I mean, I personally would not want to parse this, but applications and tools, this is fantastic for them.
But also, of course, with the according overhead, right? We will talk about performance probably also later. This is, of course, a challenge because you see, if you compare the one line of data, how much of it is data and how much of it is all the metadata surrounding it, you see that it's probably not efficient for mass transport of data. Carlos, we were at the use cases still. So I think we checked that ODBC and JDBC might sometimes be a challenge just in deploying the driver and opening the ports. Any other use cases that you can see?
Also, the other tools, so some of the things here that it's really good at and that I really like a lot are the ability of the visualization tools like Power BI and Tableau to just go in and begin using the data. So if we go here and I simply say get data, it's very easy for the tool to just connect, and it can traverse, and also it can perform foreign key relationships. So there's a lot of interesting things here. Yeah, it looks like my machine's running a bit slow today. Apparently it didn't get enough sleep either, so. So here, if we look at this, we can see that OData is one of OData feeds here. So we're just going to quickly go and connect to a table. Let's go for a small table here. And let's use the same URL for now. So let's go here to sales order detail. And we'll go through and begin importing the data for this table. Right? And it says it couldn't authenticate. So what we want is basic authentication. And if you're familiar with DV, you know that our default password and user is admin. So we're just going to connect there. And you're going to start to begin to see a little bit of the overhead too, right? So now it's going to go through, it's going to get the table, gets the data, the metadata, and now we can begin loading the data. So you're going to see here how it's good And it's really great for the tools, right? Because they part of the metadata includes the indexes and foreign keys. So we're waiting for this to load. Let's take a little look at a little bit of the documentation. Here we go. So as you can begin seeing, loading the data is pretty slow. We won't probably just leave it running in the background. But you have a lot of options here with the use cases. I mean, the tools themselves and even users can go through and say, if you want this, you can add filters, you can specify the result set format. You have quite a lot of flexibility. And here we have an interesting example where the database has foreign keys and primary keys set on it, and you can actually navigate the data. So let's take a look at this. Is going to take a long time, by the way, because it's a lot of data. So one of the interesting things here is you can actually go through and say, we want the data out of AdventureWorks. We want the address, right? And we're going to take address ID number 1, the first address. And then we're going to follow the foreign key relationship to get the country and region. Right. So you can see here the equivalent SQL statement and what it looks like in ODATA. So again, I don't find it very user-friendly, but this is fantastic for the tools. Right.
And
so it's very easy.
Go ahead.
Oh, that was it.
Yeah. So do you think you can formulate most of the queries, so that now that you've been working with it in the preparation, so do you think that most of the SQL statements that you can think of can be expressed in OData as well, or are there limitations?
There are definitely limitations. As you can see here on that help on how to follow the foreign key constraint, the OData server itself requires the primary keys and indexes and foreign keys to be established prior to its use, or else it won't, the OData server won't be able to use it. The thing here is that without that, I can still write very complex queries in SQL, and I can join things even if there's no foreign keys or indexes created. So there's a lot more flexibility in the SQL. And in this case, also, there's a lot of flexibility in our REST API interface, because in the REST API interface, you can include a fairly large or complex payload, and you can also do a lot more automation. So there are definitely limitations, but it's really good for the tools. The tools really do love the OData interface. It works great. It's very seamless to the tools. But as far as things that you can do, SQL and in our REST API offer a lot of flexibility, and especially for automation.
So while we're looking at Tableau here, so is Tableau also Power BI, is Power BI doing this in live mode, or is it getting this into an extract?
It's getting it into an extract at the moment. Since the OData interface tends to be slower, and the same thing happens if we query the REST interface in with either Tableau or Power BI, it will perform it as an extract. So right now it's trying to load all of the data, and this one is fairly large, so I'm going to have to kill it. But this is approximately 100,000 rows or something like that, and some of the columns are about 4 or 5 4K of text. So it gets a little large. So I'm going to kill this before I.
You probably want to do a smaller one, right? A smaller
Yes.
table just for the sake of illustration.
Yes. Go ahead.
Also regarding this performance, right, it is also how is it requesting this internally? Did you investigate, like, is there a paging involved, or is it getting this whole data in one statement, in one request?
No, it's actually doing a lot of pagination. So if we go here, you'll search for pagination, and by default, oh. No, it doesn't show up. Here we go. So I just saw it here. Oh, there we go. So OData utilizes batches in 256 rows at a time. And it also depends on the calling tool. So if we run Tableau, interesting enough, gives you the number of rows it's loaded. Oh, and it looks like we have a couple of questions. Credentials. So the questions are about credentials. Credential is the default for admin. Yes, that is our default user. So normally as soon as you configure your server, you're going to change your admin password, but the default is admin. And can you use other credentials? Yeah, so if you have LDAP configured on your server, the credentials you're going to pass are still going to be basic authentication, but it's going to then authenticate against LDAP, the LDAP server, not against the local user store.
And also, if I may add to that, regarding these user credentials, there's also a set of permissions applied to that, right? So you probably don't want to expose all your data via OData, but it's really the same restrictions that you see in the studio. So if you provide permissions for schemas, for views and tables, these permissions are also applied to the user that is logging in via any interface virtually. So JDBC, ODBC, REST API, and OData, they will only see the data that they have the permission for, and also column row-based filtering and data masking, hashing, all these things will apply as well.
And in fact, we have a new OData role specifically for this. And the reason we're not running into this issue is because I'm connecting as the administrator, and the administrator includes the OData role. But if I created a user in a role that does not have the OData role, then they would not be able to access any of the data through the OData interface. We have another question. Can the OData interface only be used for DML statements, or could you also create or drop objects via this interface? Currently, we have, excuse me, currently we have some limitations, and the normal create view, drop view is not supported. And I don't know whether, I think the plans are to support that, but at the moment, no. Definitely our REST API, you can send it a complete payload with very complex instructions, including automation that could create views or schemas or tables, in fact. If that answers the question.
But there are some, probably not drop and create, but I think we saw delete, right? Carlos, if you look at the documentation again, I think at the bottom, so there is not only OData is not only for reading data, it's also, you see there, so updating is allowed, right? Because I think, yeah, okay, Sebastian's question was about dropping things, but updating and deleting data is possible. Of course, it needs, then we are probably in a context of a table, right? Because for it's probably challenging to do this on a view to trace back the data from a select statements to your deletes. But yeah, some more options than just reading are available. Just wanted to mention that.
So one of the other things I'd like to talk about are the special requirements for this. So if we're looking at things, so if I try to query my OData right here, oops, where am I? Let me start here with the OData. So some of the things, let me close all my windows. And as we can see here on the OData, these will show up, and these I can access and query. And if you notice, these are wrappers around a table, right? And this is needed for a couple of reasons. So if you are going to query a table inside of MySQL, let me see if it's this one right here. Here we go, customers. So this one, all the tables are required to have a primary key, or else you won't be able to use them. So in some instances, this isn't possible. So what you would do is you would build a wrapper view around this. So what we do here is we have around sales order detail, we're going to look at this view, and it's a wrapper around a table that does not have a primary key. Right, so if we go to MySQL and we look at this data here, right, we do have primary keys on it. Great, so we could use this directly, or in the case where this doesn't have a primary key and the foreign key, we would be able to wrap this and indicate to data virtuality what the new primary key is. And it's very straightforward, actually. So you're simply redefining the metadata here, and you're also indicating what the primary key is. So if we go and we look at this table, MySQL Cloud, and sales order detail regular, and we look at the columns, it's exactly this definition right here that we are then recreating and specifying the data types. And I don't know if you're thinking the same thing I am, that this could get pretty tedious, especially if you have quite a large number of tables or views that you would want to expose through OData, and it requires having this new wrapper. But we do have some tools and some views here to assist you with that. So we have a couple wrapper functions here that you can simply specify the source name and the target name, and it will go through and automatically create these wrappers for you. And we have two of these. So this one is for the views. As you can tell, two different programmers wrote both of them. We have these were written by Anya. You see really good code there. And you have mine here, which is not as compact, definitely. So we already have tools to help you, and these will be part of the release so that you can kind of go through and begin using this and creating your own wrappers fairly quickly, right? So you don't have to go through that tedious task by yourself. So any other questions, Matthias?
Absolutely. So for me, of course, I'm interested in these creation procedures, because I think this is what we're here for the masterclass. Interesting stuff you were mentioning. So can you probably show one of them? I mean, not even run, but just explain what the code is doing.
Yes. So we have two of them here. So we're going to look a little, we're going to see in just a little bit that we have a need to create wrapper views. And in case you have to do it with the entire schema, we'll start here. If you want to create wrappers around all of your views in a particular schema, say we wanted to do this one, we can simply call this, and let me just say here, make a call statement. And this one would be our schema of views. We would have everything in views, and we're going to send all of these wrapped to the OData, right? And this way we have a little bit more granularity. We would provide the OData role access to just OData, so that we're not giving them access to everything. And this is how this one would work. And actually, let's go. We have a question. Are the primary?
Yeah, it's by my good friend Don. So hi, Don, by the way.
Hi, Don.
Are the primary key definitions in OData syntax only, documentary, or is it DV using these constraints in creating the query plan? So kind of probably goes also in the direction of push down ability.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one. I'm going to have to get back to you on that.
Yeah,
That
I
is a
think
really good question.
But I think for the primary key, Don, for us it was just the solution engineering look at things. We saw we needed it to appear in OData at all, right? If we want this to be in OData, it needs a primary key because this is a constraint coming from the OData itself. So these things will only appear if you put this key on it. I think might be interesting if we have this kind of joint statement, but it's probably too much for this session. But if this kind of joint statement is happening that you showed on the documentation, if this is really being pushed down as a join, so DV is not getting both of them, so but really identifying this as a join that it can do if both tables are on one data source, right? But yeah, I think yeah, but we have to try it. So we will find this answer, the complete answer to this question later on, and also put it into the GitHub so everyone can benefit from this question. But good question, thank you so much.
Okay, back to the stored procedure. So this one is very simple, right? We specify a source schema and a target schema, and it's going to simply make a call to, it's going to loop on all of the views that we have, and we're going to use our system view here. And we're going to look at, I need to edit this. Excuse me 1 second. There we go, or else it won't let me execute any queries. So here we're just going to use our system view, which is exposes all the views. And we're going to look at all of the table schemas and table names, and we're simply going to loop on these, right? And now that we have this, we're going to loop on each and every single view every single view that is in that schema. So if I wanted to convert everything that is in the views, we would have these views here converted and have a wrapper created on them. And by default, it just grabs the first column, right? So if the view already exists, it goes through and drops it. If not, it can also do updates in place. So theoretically, you could say do all the changes in place with view. So you would just put view here and view here, make the call, and this would make the changes issuing alter statements versus dropping them and recreating them. And let's take a look at the actual code that does all the fun part. So here, what this does is goes through, and we have a quick flag here about whether we're going to do an in place, and what this means is that we're going to use the alter statement to alter the view, or instead of creating a new one. A bunch of template definitions here. Also, if you run this by default, it's going to say inline modifications are not allowed for safety reasons. And what this should be a good clue to everyone is make a backup, please back up, put your changes in Git, do something, but make sure you keep a copy. It'll, yeah. So it'll just go through and loop on all the columns and uses all of this information to fill in the information using these templates, and it'll just create a new one. And let's go through and see what that looks like. So I used this previously, and I use it on this one. Let's do the sales tax rate. I'll drop this view. And I'm going to call this here. And I want to do it as a call statement. And my source schema is views. And it was sales tax rate. I'll just double check that. Okay, let's do salesperson then. Copy name. And let's make sure we don't have it over here. I'm gonna drop the view salesperson. Oh, where was I? There we go. Move the views part. And I'm going to send this new one over to ODATA, the ODATA schema. And double check. Here we don't have salesperson at all. And now I'm just going to execute this. It'll go through, run the code, and create the wrapper. And now that we go here, let's refresh. And of course, it's a demo and it didn't work.
Yeah, but at least, but I mean, we can see the
Yeah.
resulting statements. I think they are the interesting ones, and you can just probably show the new definition where it's all of these things are in there. So it really, I think it did it correctly, but it didn't execute.
It did do it correctly, but it didn't execute it. And let's look at this, the code here. I forgot. Yeah, it's been a while since I wrote this one in particular.
I forced Carlos to do this in the very morning to execute some code he didn't even plan to execute. So fair enough in terms of statement.
Yeah. So now we can see it executed. It created the code and executed and built the wrapper for you automatically, right? Including the primary key. And if this is the wrong primary key, when you go through, just simply change it out and issue an alter and rerun it, and that'll fix it. That'll create a new wrapper for you.
Awesome. Thank you very much for this code. We will supply this also will be on our GitHub, and you could probably think of other use cases where you can iterate over metadata and replace some things to automate processes. So Carlos, regarding the ODATA versus the other ways of connecting to data virtuality. So let's go back on our track, looking at it from a top perspective. So ODATA versus REST API versus JDBC. So which one is preferable when?
OData is great when you have a tool that can't use the REST API or a native JDBC or ODBC driver. Mainly if you have a tool that just doesn't have JDBC or ODBC support. The JDBC or ODBC driver is going to be your best bet. It'll be the fastest. And ODBC and JDBC are also self-describing protocols, right? Because the information for the rows and columns is included. So if we see here, if we go through and let's go with Tableau here. Let me open up an OData example. If I refresh, so I extracted all of this information here, and I'm using an extract. And what this means is that it is actually going to read 10,000 rows and store it on disk, right? And it says, hey, the entire files are going to be replaced. Caution, I'm going to say yes. And again, it asks me for my password, username and password, admin. And you'll see here it opens up, and approximately less than 10 seconds, it refreshes 10,000 rows. So it's pretty quick. And this is, again, all running locally on my server in this particular case. So, and my machine's a little slow, so bear with me. So you can see here that this is a lot of data, and it's being refreshed at about 30 seconds. And it's creating the extract now. And it imported, this is 10,000 rows, excuse me. And if we go here, I'm also using extract. And if I refresh it, again, it's asking me for the password. And of course it failed. So let me try that one more time. Admin, everything's correct. Oh, it did not like that. Let me double check to make sure I have this. So it's PG SQL source OData. That's correct. And should be this one right here, customers. And it does have a primary key. So one of the important things is if you do run into an error where it can't find it, make sure you double check and make sure it has a primary key and that the system has loaded the metadata for this. So this should be working. It is, well, not sure why not. Again, I'd like to reiterate that I'm running a nightly build, and this did work just a few hours ago. And right now, I'm running into an error someplace. But you can see previously that this was running, and it did grab all of the metadata appropriately. And the thing I wanted to show here was just the time it takes for it to grab the data. Let me try one more thing.
In the meantime, let me reply to Don's question. So, yes, so as Carlos made sure that there is an index on this, sorry, there is a primary key on this table itself. It can be accessed directly. It's probably barely the use case, right? It depends if you're on an operational use case or if you're on an analytical use case, if you want to expose tables at all, right? So for us, the best practice, and this is why probably also why Don is pointing to that, is that you want to limit the access and to tables directly, because it's always difficult, especially for self-service users. They might formulate not so efficient queries directly against data sources, and we just pass them through. And if they're not efficient, that's probably a challenge, and the literal Oracle admin will knock on your door. So technically, Carlos did the right thing, but DV style, you are right, Don.
So I changed the URL to access a different OData table. So this one is in OData, and it's the sales order detail. And this one, as you can see here, the query immediately returned the metadata. And if we go back to the sheet, there we go. It's going to begin the extract. So it's going to import Tableau in particular. Does about approximately 200 rows at a time. Sometimes it does a little, it seems to do a little bit more, a little bit less sometimes. And you can see here that it's progressing, and this is a very, very large table. So it's going, but this is going to take a long time. But just wanted to show that it is pretty easy to configure your system and get it up and running, especially if you already have all the primary keys and foreign keys already configured. Importing the data with OData is very trivial. And again, if you can't deploy ODBC connectors or JDBC drivers to people and configure on their desktop, ODBC is a really nice option there.
But it seems like you would probably want to pre-aggregate your data before you send it to Tableau. But on the other hand, it's an extract, right? You can also refresh this with the Tableau server if you have it at night, or things like that. But also, Tableau does not really offer the connection at all for live data, so it's probably an issue that's in the protocol. So that it's not as performant as you would need it for live queries.
Yes, very true. Very true. The other thing too is if we look at the speed here, I just killed this because it's a very, very large table. So if we look over here at our REST API, right? And we can see here the speed in retrieving the data in a batch is about the same, right? So here we have our sales order detail, and we have our sales order detail over here, but this one is in was using the REST API. We can see right here. And the difference here is that it took about the same amount of time to get the batched information, but this contained all of the information in the table. And I'm only limit, and this really bloats my browser and will actually kill it. And I have to do a limit of 250. And the speed in which the batch is returned is about the same. But the overall performance is probably due in part to the REST API returned all of the data as JSON, but OData requires it to be in batches of 250 or less. So it's probably the back and forth going in chunks that is the part of the performance penalty, right, with OData.
Mm. When we take a look at OData in general again, would you be using that to transfer data between data virtuality instances, let's say production or a test environment and production, or development and test? Would you use it for that?
I would not. I mean, it's a good interface, but the JDBC driver provides a lot more metadata and provides it a lot faster. The protocol for that JDBC uses is all in binary format. And so there's a lot less overhead, right? Because this one has to build an XML response, send the XML response, and then the recipient has to parse that and parse that out. And with JDBC, the protocol itself is just much, much faster. So you would simply, we would add another data source here, right? And this applies more to the platform, right? So if we look over here, we have data virtuality, and this is going to be using our JDBC driver, and we would put in the host, the schema, and the username, and this would be the fastest way to synchronize information. So I would not use OData for that. Definitely JDBC is the way to go. I mean, we could theoretically do it, and I mean, one of the big advantages of OData and the REST API is that it doesn't require a lot of extra configuration for the firewall or network security, because usually port 8080 and port 80 and 443 in those are open. So it's pretty straightforward to begin using either the REST API or OData. And in order to get the JDBC connector behind your firewall and everything, you probably have to go to your networking team and have them open up those ports. So to answer the question, there are definite benefits to OData, but I would not use it to synchronize two servers. It'd be too slow.
Okay. So what about authentication? We talked about this a little bit, but can you probably summarize?
Yeah, when authenticating with either the REST API or OData, you're going to be using basic authentication. And what that means is here in your connection, we're going to go through and we're going to edit the source. And in here, it is as part of the connection, we can specify what the username and password is, right? So it's going to be basic authentication. It's going to be sent in the headers, not in clear. And also, if you're using LDAP, the username and password here that you're putting in is your username and password for your LDAP authentication, right? So data virtuality in the background is going to go in, and we're going to look at our managed users right now. And it's going to go in, look you up in your users, and it will find you and then perform the authentication either with LDAP or internally with its own user management. And then it will figure out what roles you have access to. And given that information, apply security and privileges. It will apply any restrictions that will allow you to see the appropriate views and tables. And also it will perform any masking or row filtering automatically.
All right. Are there any best practices that you can remind us of when using OData?
Yeah, so one of the things I found, or at least for me, from a security standpoint, I like segregating out my OData wrappers to a separate schema. And this way I can control my permissions quite easily. I can say that this one is the one that is accessible. No, well, let's just use that one. And OData, and this would be my permission for the OData schema. And that way I know for a fact that OData users would not be able to access anything outside of the OData virtual schema. right? And also, if I want to keep my original views, I could modify all of my views to include the metadata here, including the primary key. But personally, I like to keep them separate. This one is clearly a personal preference. And the only downside to this is if you're creating these views and you change the columns or change the column types, you're going to have to recreate this. And the other advantage is you could do it inline, but I like having these to be run manually. I want to be able to run these manually and make sure that there's and do my testing separate from my main views. This way I can keep these main views in production, right? And I can keep these running, and then I can do the automate the building of the wrappers. And then I can focus all of my testing efforts strictly on the OData and just compare the two to make sure that they're working correctly. So that's my advice for best practices. As people become more fluent and use OData, please let us know what you find most useful. We really appreciate your assistance and helping shape the product too. So.
All right. Anything else you want to show us, Carlos?
No, not at the moment. I'd like you to definitely stick around for the procedural relational commands. We're going to be building on the OData foundation that we have here. And we're going to be able to execute stored procedures as views. Sounds crazy, but it is going to be awesome. So stick around.
You sold that so well. Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. As in the next track, we will be looking at the KSQL interface for data virtuality. So that will be the next thing to see. Right now, we're going to take a break for everyone and for Carlos to also catch some breath. And after the KSQL DB, we will be showing the relational procedural command. So stay tuned. See you in 15 minutes.
Yeah, the KSQL DB is also going to be awesome. It's going to be Matthias. So stick around.